Okay, so welcome everyone to this Facebook Live. I put some ideas out there and I got some feedback on putting out a live about the secrets to optimum nervous system regulation. And what I'd like to share with you today are the four pillars of regulation. Those are the foundational pieces that allow us to most effectively regulate our nervous systems. Now, nervous system regulation is a relational experience. Now, there's this thing called self-regulation. So you might think, okay, how in the world is that relational if it's just within myself? Well, the cool thing about that is that self-regulation is actually a copy of what we learn in co-regulation with an exchange of body language. So let's back up here just a minute and define regulation. So I've heard a lot of different ways of defining regulation of the autonomic nervous system we're talking about here. But the way I'd like to define it today is the automatic calibrating of life-sustaining body systems by the autonomic nervous system. So when you're in safe circumstances, that is, there's no threat around you, your nervous system puts you into a mode. It calibrates all of your life-sustaining systems, your breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your digestion, your immune system, your muscular system, your nervous system, of course, which allows all of those different pieces to communicate, your hormones, your lymph to clear out toxins, and so on and so forth. So if nervous system regulation is automatic, if it happens by itself, how are we changing our regulation? How are we changing the way that we regulate our nervous systems? Well, that's what I wanted to focus on today. Before I get into the four pillars of regulation and what they are, I'd like to point out that because it happens automatically, we can only influence regulation. So that happens automatically, and it also happens purposefully. We can choose to do something to change how our nervous system is calibrating. And the reason why we'd want to change anything, because our body's sustaining our life just fine, right? Well, the quality of our experience of sustaining our life systems changes depending on what mode the nervous system thinks we need to be in, which brings up a concept called neuroception. Okay, think about that word and breaking it down. Neuro, having to do with neurons in the nervous system. Ception, the second part of the word perception. Reception. Um, so neuroception is the unconscious perception of the autonomic nervous system. So the part of our nervous system that controls all the automatic systems is constantly reaching out and scanning the environment. And this brings us to one of the pillars of optimum nervous system regulation, which is your environment. And I'm going to get into that in great detail shortly. If your nervous system perceives, here, one second, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to pull up, come on, pull up the photos. Here we go. Okay, so there are three basic zones of the autonomic nervous system. Down at the bottom of the screen is the green area. Okay, think green means go, and that's when our nervous system perceives safety. When we're able to socially engage with one another, that is, we can exchange body language cues and reinforce a sense of, oh, I'm okay. And you might actually have that sense of relief, and you might even sigh literally when you see somebody you love and you feel safe around. Okay. And that's what happens when we're in that lowest level of stress, which happens in what's called the ventral vagal parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. When we go up into the yellow zone, that's when our body shifts resources. So this concept of regulation, we're now regulating something for a completely different purpose. Instead of being at our optimal best in the green zone, up at the yellow zone, it's about surviving danger, some sort of danger that's showing up in our environment. And this can be real or perceived. So our neuroception, the automatic scanning of our environment that our body does, we pick up all of these cues, and unconsciously we pick up these cues at a far higher rate than we consciously pick them up. So you can notice what you see in the room, different colors, shape, textures, depths, and so on. And you can also notice the things that you hear, the things that you feel with your fingers or any other part of the skin on the outside of your body. Okay. You can smell. Yeah, I can still smell the remnants of lunch that I cooked here earlier. And you can taste. And you might notice taste on your tongue from something that you just ate or drank. I have some lemon ginger tea here that delicious. These are all examples of consciously noticing cues in the environment through our senses. We take in sensory cues. Now, unconsciously, we're taking in a couple million times that. Okay, so the proportion that, as they describe it in neurolinguistic programming, I love this way of describing it. Your conscious mind takes in 126 bits of information per second. For frame of reference, a bit is half of a computer byte. Um, for those computer people out there, that doesn't really mean much to me. I'm not really a tech savvy guy. But anyway, consciously 126 bits through our sensations, okay, through our senses, our five senses, and also internally, which is what's called interoception, the perception of what's going on inside versus exteroception out there. Okay, so consciously 126 bits, but unconsciously every second, our neuroceptive capabilities taking in cues from the environment are to the tune of 2 million per second. And processing is even more of a discrepancy. It's a little lower consciously. We process about 40 bits per second. And we're taking even more in that we're processing from now and from other moments in the past and potential future in the present at about 40 million bits per second. So it's to the tune of a couple million versus less than or around 100-ish bits per second that we're taking in or processing information. Clearly, most of what we're taking in is unconscious. Hence, the need to look at what's going on in the autonomic nervous system and how it affects our day, right? How it affects our lives, right? And so what I want to do here is finish up mapping out the nervous system in a basic way. This lowest level of stress is ideal for many circumstances, but if we actually have to escape a threat, mobilization through the sympathetic nervous system, getting us to move quickly, okay? Think quickly, move quickly. We're not thinking critically. We're not contemplating. We're not engaging in abstract thinking and planning. We're like, okay, what's the immediate reflexive thing that needs to happen in order to get out of this dangerous situation? Okay, so the example I've used in a recent live is if you walk out into the street and suddenly you notice a car coming, you jump out of the way. You don't stop and go, would it be a good idea to jump out of the way of this car? No, you just do it automatically. It's a quick reflexive response. That's a healthy purpose of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-flight response, if you will. It's movement-oriented. But when you go up higher into that immobilization zone, that red light zone, you might call it. Red means stop, right? At a traffic light. Well, in this case, it refers to a numbing out and shutting down of the systems of the body. So it's a high level of stress. It's higher than the sympathetic fight-flight branch of the nervous system. The dorsal vagal parasympathetic. So you notice there are two branches of the parasympathetic, hence the term polyvagal theory, the multiple branches of the vagus nerve that we're talking about here. When you're in that red zone, your body is in a high level of stress, but it shuts down. So a great example that Peter Levine talks about in one of his videos, I think you can pretty easily look it up online. I may throw it in the comments afterward. We'll see if I remember, or remind me if it's important to you, if I might forget. So there's this predator animal, I think it's a cheetah, and chasing down a gazelle. I might have the animal wrong, but you get the idea, predator prey, right? And the cheetah chases down and catches the gazelle, grabs onto its neck with its powerful jaws, right? And what they do in this particular video is they slow down that video and they rewind it and show what happens to the gazelle as the cheetah is just about to grab the neck. What happens is the gazelle goes limp right before the jaws grab onto the neck. Why? Because once the gazelle is caught It's not an optimal survival strategy to struggle. It's going to get its neck broken and more likely will get killed, right? So the optimal survival strategy is to go limp, to stop struggling, to immobilize. That's that red light response. Okay. And that's what happens whenever we're overwhelmed, when we don't have the resources to fight or flee a situation, mentally or physically. Maybe, somebody at school or your boss at work says something and it really pisses you off. They really crossed the line. They're maybe it's very disrespectful and you want to just yell out, or maybe you want to slap the person, right? That impulse, I'm not saying to do it, by the way. I'm saying the impulse comes up, right? Because our bodies are trying to mobilize us for this perceived threat. Remember, the body goes into a different mode, whether there's a real threat or it's a perceived threat. So even if we feel threatened and we're not actually in physical danger, our body most likely goes into this experience. Now, if we can't do anything, or we might realize, okay, I shouldn't slap him. That's a bad idea. I could go to jail or I could get reprimanded or fired or something bad will happen. Okay, so I restrain that impulse. I stop myself from moving my body in a defensive or aggressive way. Okay. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. In this circumstance, in work or school, don't hit somebody when you're upset at them. Bad idea. Don't lash out at them verbally either. It's probably not going to help them get on your side, but that's a whole other conversation. So what happens when we restrain those impulses? Well, our body has to do something with that energy and it goes up and up and up. The stress load builds. It's like that internal stress load, right? And what happens is it's kind of like the brake and the accelerator are being pushed at the same time. And we reach that point of overwhelm where we either collapse, we dissociate, we go into a mental or emotional state of distraction or apathy or forget it, it's useless. That's not a low stress state. That's all the way up in the red zone. Okay, so the reason I bring all of this up is that regulation of the autonomic nervous system is something that happens automatically. And what's more important than how to change it is recognizing where we are on this spectrum. Okay, I'm just going to quickly check in, see if there are any comments right now, just to see if there are any questions. Okay, I see a couple people tuning in. No questions yet. Excellent. Okay, cool. I do have 2 questions that were asked already, and I will get to those. Okay, so let's stop sharing the screen here. Okay, and let's get back to the 4 pillars of regulation. Okay, so the 4 pillars of regulation are physically taking care of your health, so your daily health habits, exercise, diet, sunlight exposure, hydration, sleep, rest, activity, stress-reducing activities, creative activities where you're expressing yourself and allowing yourself to build skills. These are all physical needs that we have in order to function optimally. And this is mostly the area where I work with people. Now, the other 3 pillars are very important, but this first pillar of physical health is where I work with people and managing stress in the body, because that really is the foundation. So that's why I call it the first pillar, the physical health pillar. Okay, so the second pillar is your environment. The third is your relationships. And the fourth is your mindset. And so that's more conscious control. But as I discussed earlier with neuroception and the power of the unconscious, what's going on in our environment, in our relationships in particular, and the state of our physical body, that's all going to affect our mindset in a direct way. So handling the other 3 pillars before you address mindset is really important. There's this concept, mind over matter, that a lot of people have talked about over the years. And, overcoming adversity through your will, yes, that's a great concept. I don't deny that that's a valuable thing. However, because of the way our physiology works, if you focus on the mind first, you're putting the cart before the horse. You're not setting yourself up for success. Setting up your body And how do you support your body? Well, the most effective way of supporting your body is putting it in an environment with healthy relationships that allow you to be in a state of safety as much as possible. Now, we don't always have to be safe. The idea of like creating safe spaces where we never trigger anybody, that's not healthy either. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if we don't have the ability to go back into safety, we end up building a stress load, kind of like putting a frog in a pot of water and slowly bringing it to a boil. We don't realize that our stress load is going up. Our set point of what we consider normal, what our body considers normal, adjusts. Okay, so homeostasis, the regulation process that allows our breathing to be even in and out, that regulates our heart rate and blood pressure, by the way, triggering the sinoatrial node on the heart. It's called the vagal brake. When you exhale, lengthening that exhale calms and slows the heart rate and lowers your blood pressure. And the reverse happens when you inhale. So that autonomic flow of breathing in, breathing out, if you're elevating your stress levels with exercise in a way that's healthy, right? You're going to get lots of oxygen and stimulate, but you also want to recover between sets. Long, extended exhales. Okay, so that's one way we can directly affect our regulation in the body with our breathing pattern. And notice, we're influencing regulation. We're not changing the regulation process. That would be dangerous. There's so much to do internally to keep our lives sustained. All the life-giving systems, they need to happen automatically. It would be very bad if we had direct control over it. Because if you forget to breathe, you die. If you forget to eat, you die. If you forget to drink water, eventually you die. If you forget to sleep, these are all things we shouldn't have conscious control over. We need to get impulses and follow what our bodies are telling us. And this is really the essence of healthy nervous system regulation. So now that I've gone into the 4 pillars of regulation, I want to start to tap into some of the questions that have been asked because they do tie into understanding how the 4 pillars of regulation work. And brings us back to the whole point of this live. What are the secrets to optimum regulation? Optimum regulation. I have a calming sip of lemon ginger tea. Oh, that's so wonderful. Grounding, feeling my feet, lengthening my exhale, tasting the tea, feeling my fingertips. Hey, how's it going? What am I doing right now? I'm connecting to my body. Connecting to your senses helps to lower the stress response and helps you to more effectively support nervous system regulation. Now, one of the questions that was asked on the post where I introduced the idea of doing this live was brought up by Joy Hart. Hannah, if you're watching, thank you so much for asking the question. That's a great question. What are the purposes of co-regulation and self-regulation, and what are the differences between the two? Okay, so self-regulation is the internal process of regulating our own individual systems. And that happens automatically, as I mentioned. And your physical health practices, your daily habits, have a huge influence on your body's ability to stay in balance, in homeostasis. Oh, I almost forgot to mention a term. Remember when I was talking about the frog in the pot of water and slowly brought to a boil? That changing of the set point? That's something different than homeostasis. It's called allostasis. Something called an allostatic load, how high your new set point is when your stress level goes up and you don't realize it unconsciously, right? As we experience stress, as we experience stresses throughout our lives, and we don't allow ourselves to rejuvenate, to calm, to allow ourselves to rejuvenate, to sleep properly, and so on. Have some off time rather than always having to focus, always having to perform, to do, to achieve. Those things are great, but we need a balance. Okay, if we don't have the ability to do that, our allostatic load, our set point of what the body considers normal, goes up. And we start to have problems with our body because when we're in, remember that chart, the green, yellow, and red light responses. As the set point goes higher, maybe our normal becomes yellow. Go, 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 do, do, do. Constantly feel and potentially get overwhelmed very easily because we're right next to that red zone. Up, shutdown, apathy, depression. Up, we somehow lower our stress load, whether it be a breathing pattern or we get enough sleep or somebody that we love comes into the room. Okay, we're coming down and we're lowering our stress load. That is a process of regulation, of shifting zones, hopefully appropriately. When we don't shift appropriately, that's a sign that we have unresolved trauma or chronic stress that's keeping our allostatic load too high. So all of this is to say, what is self-regulation? It's that process that happens within the self, within one individual person. That's self-regulation. But as I mentioned earlier, co-regulation, the experience of regulating one another in relationship with the exchange of body language cues, which is mostly unconscious, by the way. I can't emphasize that enough. That is way more powerful than self-regulation. So when you're in a long-term relationship with someone, or I'm talking about an intimate adult relationship, but the same neural pathways have been repurposed in adult intimate relationships from our developmental circuits with our caregivers, with our parents, right? So whatever we experience with our parents, we're going to repeat those patterns unless we change something in terms of doing the personal growth work. It's going to be the same type of behavior, the same emotional climate we're going to unconsciously create from our childhood. So that's the whole, heal your inner child movement. What is that really? That's the patterns that were developed in your early childhood. Anyway, so that was established with your parental caregivers, a co-regulation experience. And guess what? Co-regulation, that exchange between caregiver and infant, sets the blueprint for how your nervous system automatically functions. Your regulation is a direct result, your self-regulation is a direct result of the co-regulation you experienced with your parents. And any discrepancy that's not, secure attachment is sort of the gold standard in terms of you stay at the green zone unless you absolutely need to, and then you adjust flexibly throughout that zone, yellow, red, green, red, green, maybe an orange or a blue, a combination of the colors, you might say, because it's not as simple as you're in one zone or another. There are combinations. Anyway, so whatever you experience with your caregivers, that pattern of co-regulation, the relational exchange of body language cues, that's co-regulation. And in infancy and through childhood, it sets the blueprint for what happens in your adult life in adult intimate relationships, because those circuits in early development are repurposed. And we call this attachment as a regulation theory. There was attachment theory as a behavioral theory where they looked at how children and their caregivers interacted, and they noticed behaviors as adults and in intimate relationships. We now know through the work of Dr. Alan Shore that there are regulation patterns that happen in the nervous system that correspond to what's going on in your attachment behavior. You know what zone of the autonomic nervous system you're in based on the type of behavior you show. And there is a relevant tool that will support you to bring your body, to guide it, to support it, to facilitate it, to go back into the appropriate zone. So if someone's crossing a boundary, if someone's getting in your face, guess what? Getting into the yellow zone is appropriate. It's appropriate to feel anger when someone's breaching your boundaries. They physically get in your space, or they emotionally cross over a boundary, and you say, listen, this isn't comfortable for me, and they keep going. It's appropriate to get angry. Anger is an awareness of our boundaries. Now, rage is what most people associate with anger. That's a whole other Facebook conversation. Rage is where it gets out of control, and there's blame and vitriol and mental and physical violence sometimes. That's rage. Anger is a healthy response to boundaries being breached. Okay, so co-regulation happens when we are regulating one another by giving each other cues of safety. So you might say to someone that you care about when you see them, when they walk in the room, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. And you hear your own voice and the prosody in your voice, the change in the inflection, the tone of voice that shifts with your emotions that are being conveyed. They hear that, and that supports their nervous system regulation. And you hear your own voice, and then you hear them respond, "Oh, hey, Mike, how's it going? Great to see you." And you read their body language cues, mostly unconsciously. You can learn to read it consciously. That's some of what I teach and some of what I do with my clients. But most of it, to the tune of millions of bits of information per second. That's how we co-regulate. Now, the same thing happens when we dysregulate in a relational setting. So what would you call that? Co-dysregulation? I actually haven't heard a specific term for it, but that's what I'm going to call it. Co-dysregulation is when you're with either an intimate partner or a parent or a child, and they hit your nerve in a way that no one else can. And you just want to wring their neck. You're like, oh my God, how can somebody get under my skin like this? I thought I was doing great today. How did they say just the wrong thing? How did my daughter say exactly what she needed to say to flip me? My kids used to make fun of me because I have slash had this persona of meditating and being calm. And so whenever I would lose my cool, they would go, "Whoa, Buddha, Buddha, hold on, calm down." And it was actually playful. Sometimes it pissed me off, but I got the intention. That was actually a playful banter. They helped me to re-regulate after they did something that dysregulated my nervous system. Now, the difference between co-regulation and self-regulation is, okay, my daughter says something or my son says something that just set me off. It triggers me in a way where I suddenly go into an automatic yellow or red reaction, usually yellow light, usually mobilized, hey, I didn't like that. I'm going to tell you. When that happens, that's a co-regulation or co-dysregulation in this case experience. Them joking with me and helping me come back into a more self-regulated state is the joking and being lighthearted about it and playfully bantering with me. Of course, I have to be receptive to that, right? I have to be a good sport. So we had that rapport. I mean, we have that rapport, but my kids are adults now, so I don't see them as often as I used to when they were, children, teenagers, and so on. So here's the thing that you might want to keep in mind, Hannah, and whoever else is tuning into this question, this very lengthy answer to the question about the difference and purposes between co-regulation and self-regulation. Rest in peace, Sue Johnson, the great attachment researcher who researched body language cues in the context of what's called emotionally focused therapy. There are two different kinds of EFT. EFT, in this case, I'm talking about emotionally focused therapy. Derek Hart, if you're watching, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of his work is based on emotionally focused therapy, and there are different branches of it. I think he followed a different tradition of that. Anyway, coming back from that tangent, pull it back in. Okay, so when we're talking about the experience of co-regulation versus self-regulation, the experience of what's going on to regulate my bodily systems versus the support of someone else supporting mine, me supporting them, the co-regulation experience. The difference between the two is striking. Self-regulation processes could be compared to a 20-watt flashlight. This is directly from Sue Johnson, which is why I brought her up. I learned this from her teachings. So self-regulation, 20-watt flashlight, whereas comparatively, the experience of co-regulation or co-dysregulation is more comparable to the floodlights of a stadium in terms of neurological power. That's why your attachment figures get under your skin or light you up like no other. It's because those circuits are designed to cue your nervous system to feel safety at the deepest possible level, flooding your system with oxytocin, maybe vasopressin more if you're an adult male. I don't know if that how exactly that applies to women. That's not my area. But oxytocin and vasopressin have a lot of similarities, and it's said that vasopressin is more the influencing neurochemical with men, whereas Oxytocin is more in women, although they both affect and are factors for both men and women. The experience of co-regulation is so much more powerful. And if you recall, it's the foundation for how we self-regulate. So I'm going to diverge from this question. I think I gave you a sense of the differences between self-regulation and co-regulation. The differences not only in what they are, but the power of the two. Co-regulation, relationship power of regulating the nervous system, far more powerful than self-regulation. Now, that doesn't take away our responsibility to work on our own self-regulation and make sure that even if we're dysregulated, that we don't abuse other people or shut people out or anything that's inappropriate or unkind behavior. We're still responsible for our behavior. But what's going on underneath is important to understand. So I want to diverge from the question a little bit and go back to the 4 pillars of regulation. So with the physical pillars, let's just quickly go over the basics. I have a PDF that gives you a list and the order of the most important foundational physical habits for optimal self-regulation. So send me a direct message on Facebook with your email, and in addition to your email, send habits PDF, and your email, and I will email it to you after this live is over. Okay, so those habits that are written in that PDF are sunlight exposure, setting the circadian rhythm, making sure that your sleep cycle is optimized, getting up with the sun and having sunlight exposure, not looking directly into the sun. That would be very hurtful for your vision. Looking in that direction, not directly, and allowing the sunlight exposure around the first hour and a half after the light first starts coming up. It's when the colors are out there that it's most effective. And that sets the tone for your nervous system to move through the day in a particular way internally so that your cortisol spikes and it brings your body temperature up and up and up till about mid-afternoon, and then it starts to go down. And when your temperature starts to go down, you are less alert, you're starting to prepare for sleep, and your serotonin goes up and your melatonin goes up, and you appropriately get tired when it starts to get dark. And all the lights that we have, like I have all these lights illuminating me right now, these artificial lights that are not ideal for my nervous system. They're going to interrupt and dysregulate my circadian rhythm from the sunlight exposure that I got this morning. However, if I get out at sunset within about an hour and a half window, right around the time when you see the colors on the horizon, getting out there and looking in the direction of sunset, obviously not directly at it, but looking at those beautiful colors, that also helps support your nervous system regulation and setting your circadian rhythm back in line. So the nervous system is powerfully regulated by light exposure, and that offsets the sunset, offsets the effects of screens and overhead lights after it gets dark out. And so it doesn't completely make up for all of the artificial lights. You should try to minimize those at night as much as possible. But again, that's in the PDF that I can email you if you would like that. So sunlight exposure, so you have healthy sleep. It's one of the most powerful regulators of sleep and your body temperature internally. Cortisol and adrenaline and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, all of these neurochemicals and neuromodulators and so on, they're more optimized when you get proper sunlight exposure. So all of you people who think that you're night owls, it's a very small percentage of the population that are. They've done studies on this. It's very small, and so many more people say they are night owls than actually are, and it's just not how our systems are designed. Anyway, so light exposure. This is still in the physical pillar, right? Getting proper hydration, making sure to drink enough water. But if you eat processed foods, guess what? That's going to dehydrate you. And so eating whole foods actually helps you to be more hydrated because processed foods require more water in the cellular digestive processes. And so it takes more water out of your cells. And so you don't have as much water available to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. Okay. And your brain is what, 80% water, I think? I think it's about 70, 80% water. It needs a lot of water, and so do your muscles, and so on. So light exposure, hydration, sleep goes in there with light exposure, exercise, and making sure you get enough protein in a healthy, whole foods diet. How exactly you do that, I say listen to your body. There are methods of assessing what foods work best for you, figuring out if you might have a mild allergy. I discovered I have a mild allergy to chicken. Excuse me. I have a mild allergy to chicken. And I didn't have any idea why I was constantly having the sniffles and having swelling in my throat and eyes and nasal passages throughout my childhood. And then I took this allergy test and I found out chicken, melon, honeydew, and cantaloupe, all three of those things I'm mildly allergic to. And it messes with my breathing, it messes with my comfort, it messes with my mood. It's just not good when I ingest those things. So those are great for other people, but find out what foods are good for you and what foods are not. And as a general rule, the less processed, the better. The more natural, the better. Organic is basically the term for uh, not laden in pesticides and chemicals that are harmful for you. And unfortunately, that's become the standard, especially in the United States. So organic just means back to natural fruits and vegetables and other foods that are grown. Okay, so those are the basics of the physical pillar. The environment. Ooh, the environmental pillar. Getting your body regulated through having a healthy, safe, rejuvenating environment that's predictable. What's your schedule for sleep? What's your schedule for doing your dishes? What's your schedule for making meals? What's your schedule for doing your laundry? What's your schedule for exercise? What's your schedule for work? If you don't have some idea of predictability around these things in your life, these things that we repeat every day, because your environment is chaotic in some way, shape, or form. Maybe somebody's not willing to do their own dishes. And so you're always doing your dishes and somebody else's, or maybe more than one other person. If you're always doing their laundry, if you're always cleaning up after them, children need to learn this stuff. I'm not saying, eins, zwei, drei, like I'm not saying, be authoritarian, but they do need to learn these things. And it will drastically improve their quality of life to organize the basic life patterns that they have. And it will help your regulation to have an environment that smells clean, an environment where when you sleep, you feel rested, an environment where you can predict what's happening from moment to moment, more or less. Things happen. Life is unpredictable in general. But if your home environment is also chaotic, it's going to get in the way of your nervous system being able to calm again. So the physical pillar, yes, healthy habits, exercise, sunlight exposure, stress reducing modalities like TRE, tension trauma releasing exercises. Those are all, and that's one of the modalities I offer. These are all really helpful. But your environment, if your environment is not conducive for peace, at least for some of the time, predictably, you're going to have a problem regulating your nervous system. Your nervous system, your neuroception is going to perceive these cues that will constantly need to be managed. And so if you're constantly needing to manage the people or the things in your environment, you're not going to be able to regulate your nervous system very effectively. You're not going to be very productive. You're not going to be able to feel rested. You're not going to feel very mentally focused or calm or creative. It is possible. You can always overcome these things. But what I'm saying is, if you set yourself up for success by making sure your environment is such that it's orderly and predictable in some way. Hey, order could be my clean clothes pile and my dirty clothes pile. Whatever works for you. As long as it's predictable and you have some sense of, okay, I know that's going to happen and I know it might change, but I don't have to worry about that so much. So my environment is not constantly triggering me into yellow or the red zone. Okay. So now we have the relationship pillar. Oh, the relationship pillar. There will be many, many lives on relationships and how they affect regulation. And notice that the physical pillar includes exercise, and the relational pillar also is there, and it affects regulation. and your environment and your mind, right? But all of these pillars involve regulation. What's the connection between exercise and healthy relationships? Every time I have a solid exercise regimen, I'm a better version of myself. I'm just happier. I feel a sense of accomplishment. I'm progressing. My mood is better. My dopamine levels are optimized. There are so many good reasons to exercise, and one of them is it improves your self-regulation, and therefore you bring a better version of yourself into relationships to co-regulate. Okay. The final pillar is mindset. I have several tools for that. I have a course online on my website called Freedom Fridays, where I go over nonviolent communication tools for regulating the nervous system. That's one mindset tool. You can also look up Byron Katie's The Work. That's a wonderful tool for using your mind to reframe a difficult situation in a particular way. So just look up Byron Katie, The Work. It's wonderful stuff. She has an app. I think it costs $1. It's unbelievably helpful. But my favorite way to regulate the nervous system in the fourth pillar of mindset is through archetypes. Now, what is an archetype? Archetypes are creative, imagined ideals, you might say. The top experts who study and contemplate archetypes don't really even have a definition. I'm doing my best based on the fact that we don't really have a clear sense of archetypes other than they are universal. They are something that we instantly recognize. So, mother. What comes to mind when I say mother? You have an image in your head, don't you? It might not be a clear image. Maybe it's your mother. Maybe it's Mother Teresa. Maybe it's an ideal mother that you've seen on a TV show. You have an image of some sort. That's an archetype. Child. Maybe it's your child you picture. Maybe it's a cartoon child. Maybe it's some ideal child you saw on a TV show or a movie or something like that. Maybe it's Macaulay Culkin from the movie Alone. Um, that's an archetype. Child. Hero. Trickster. Rebel. I think of James Dean for some reason. So archetypes are a way of tapping into imaginal packages of energy. What do I mean by imaginal packages of energy? Well, for example, I use the hero archetype, specifically Superman, or occasionally I'll use Thor or Spider-Man or Iron Man or, Wonder Woman. Pick your fancy. So for me, the warrior archetype, the warrior hero, energizes me to exercise. So you might think, because I do exercise for a living, that I love it. Yes and no. There's a part of me that absolutely hates doing it over and over and over and over and over again. You know what I use in order to optimize my experience? I use archetypal energies. I use the energy of Superman. The last 3 weeks, I've turned on this mashup song between Man of Steel and Superman from the 80s, Christopher Reeves and what's the newer Superman? The guy who plays Henry Cavill. Yeah. So those two Superman theme songs, they mash them up, and it's just so inspiring to me. And I put that on and I start walking, and at a certain point, I feel this urge to run come up in me. And I go on a 2-mile run. And I didn't want to do that when I started. But calling up that fourth pillar of mindset and going into the archetypal energy of hero, of warrior hero, I feel in me the calling to embody that archetype, to be in that space. Sometimes I use, magical thinking like a child. And I imagine, hey, if I keep working on my body, maybe I'll learn the secrets of the universe and I'll be able to levitate and fly. I know that's not going to happen. But in the moment, I let the creative childlike part of myself do that. And it allows me an influx of energy. And I feel completely different about exercise in that moment. So exercise is just one example. I could do that about diet. I could do that about getting out and up in time so that I can get proper sunlight exposure. Usually I pair the two. I go running or walking when the sun's starting to come up or just before. So when I'm coming back, it's oh, the sun coming up over the horizon, the beautiful colors. I feel triumphant. I'm hearing Man of Steel, Superman mashup music in my head. I'm huffing and puffing. I really don't want to do the last half mile. And I'm like, yes, this is awesome. And I feel that energy within me and I mobilize it with archetypes. And that falls into the mindset pillar. Okay, so I've talked a lot about, actually, I just realized I haven't answered the other question. Okay, so this question by Deborah Barrett Thompson. Thank you so much for asking. How does one address generalized anxiety and insomnia? This deserves a lot more time than I have available. And so I'm going to somewhat briefly, I'm going to share my photos again here and go over the basics of, here, let's shift this chart slightly. Okay, great. So this is the same chart, but it gives you a little bit more detail of what's going on in these different zones of the autonomic nervous system. So the question is, how does one address generalized anxiety and insomnia? Well, insomnia, you might be able to answer that somewhat quickly by going back to the physical pillar, right, of sunlight exposure so that you can set your circadian rhythm to get proper sleep. That's one great answer. You also can exercise. So you optimize your dopamine. You can make sure that you're winding down near the end of the day. Don't have any overhead lights on. Have some form of carbohydrate closer to bedtime. Leave yourself a good hour, or just make sure it's liquid so it doesn't, put you into too much digestion before you're about to sleep. So that addresses the insomnia portion. And again, I'm not doing justice to the question. I realize there's a lot more nuance to it, and I would like to go into that further at another time. I am running out of time on this live here. I'm approaching an hour already on part one. So generalized anxiety, that happens in the yellow zone. In the yellow zone of the sympathetic fight-flight response, we are hyper aware of sensation. And what the body thinks it needs to do is to fight or to flee a perceived threat. Generalized anxiety is nothing more than being in that zone. Okay, I way oversimplified it. Yes, it could be from a lot of causes. However, one thing remains the same. We are operating with the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system when we feel anxiety. Because in the yellow zone, we feel a lot, often too much. We have this sense of rest we need to survive. So we need to teach it to calm down, to get a sense of, okay, I don't need to be in this yellow zone anymore because there's not actually a threat around. I can use breathing. Get a double inhale. This is called the physiological sigh, and then long exhale through the mouth. When your exhale is longer than your inhale, it starts to bring your nervous system stress levels down. Eventually, after a number of physiological sighs, you should come down toward the green zone. Now, if you're all the way at the top of the yellow zone, you may need a little bit more support. So we're going to get into that in part two, specific tools for doing that. But I wanted to at least address that sunlight exposure, proper sunlight exposure, drastically improves insomnia issues. Now, you might be in perimenopause or menopause, and as a woman, that's going to change your hormones. A lot of that is affected by your stress levels. So by addressing lowering your stress load, it will actually change your hormonal profile. So although perimenopause and menopause issues, changing your hormones, are going to directly affect your sleep and your temperature, for that matter. Remember, I talked about the temperature going up when you wake up and going down when you're in sleep, because your temperature is affected when your hormones are changing in the ways that they are during that period of change in your body. It affects your ability to sleep soundly. Anyway, so lowering your stress load will drastically change that hormonal profile. And I'm not going to say that it completely addresses it if it's perimenopause or menopause related, but it will help make it better.